Hi, I'm Yulia, and this is the News Brief. And today we're going to talk about how Donald Trump and his government are still standing in the way of Ukraine achieving any sort of meaningful peace in its war of defense against Russia. And of course, we're going to discuss it together in the comments so you don't have to suffer alone and I don't have to suffer alone. So please write your questions, suggestions, thoughts, constructive criticism, anything you have on your mind, because I read all of it. I enjoy this back and forth communication and it's very productive. Let's go. As you might have seen, recently, Giorgia Maloney actually called out Donald Trump and said that he needs to put the same determination to the ending of the war in Ukraine as he's putting into Israel and Gaza and Israel and Iran. She said, there are two very important ceasefires, and what's happening in Ukraine is unacceptable. Recently, there was a NATO conference where Trump has, as per usual, made a bunch of excuses, said he will talk to Putin, and said that he will try to figure it out. He also said, when called out about how he said he would end the war in 24 hours, and it's been 5 months and things are only getting worse, Trump said that, it's much more difficult than everyone expected. Well, not everyone. Everyone knew that Putin is not going to fold to Trump, right? Which is what he expected. It's a lot more difficult than Trump himself expected because he thought that he has Putin's respect, which clearly he does not. So, lots of very interesting details coming out to him there. There was also this conversation where a Ukrainian journalist who is based in Warsaw for BBC asked Trump a question of whether he's going to be selling Ukraine Patriot air defense missiles or whether he considered selling it. And it was a very interesting conversation. It was very monumental. It was very significant. And it was very telling because he basically, it felt like he was trying to give her a gotcha moment and wasn't able to. He asked her if she currently lives in Ukraine, because she's asking these things about air defense. And she said, well, no, I live in Poland with my son because my husband wanted me to live in Poland, but my husband lives in Ukraine. And Trump's next gotcha was, is he a soldier? And she was like, yeah, in fact, he is a soldier. He's fighting at the front line. So she gave him all of the answers to all of his gotcha questions that were unable to gotcha her. And he said that he would think about it. But the thing is, why would you think about it? Russia has been launching some of its most cruel, most awful, most devastating attacks against Ukraine lately. And Ukraine is unable to intercept a lot of it now because there were these 2,000 shells that were diverted from Ukraine to the Middle East that were actually promised and pledged to Ukraine during the Biden administration. And now is the time where Ukraine needs it arguably most. Because here's the thing, we do have some Patriot shells left, but we can't use them against drones. We can't use them against all of the incoming missiles, because if we do that, we will deplete all of our stocks, which will then further prevent us from being able to actually react to these mass attacks and to actually react to this happening. And it's a very big problem. And clearly this is the time where Trump should be saying, yes, of course, I will sell you Patriot air defense missiles, because at this point, Ukraine is not asking to pledge them. Ukraine is not asking for a donation or for a handout, as people like calling it. Ukraine is asking to purchase them. And one of these air defense missiles is something along the lines of $3 million. So it's a pretty huge arms deal that Ukraine would be doing with the US and giving a lot of money into the US budget. But Trump refuses to do that, and he refuses to do that during the time where Ukraine is actually struggling to intercept all of the massive incoming attacks from Russia. For instance, as I mentioned before, the rate of interception now is not nearly as high as it was before. In the most recent attack, instead of intercepting, let's say 75 or 80% of drones and missiles, Ukraine intercepted something around 50 or 60%, and that's a low number. There were 6 hits in Kyiv that resulted in a loss of more than 10 people and injuries of upwards 100. There was a huge attack on Dnipro the other day, and I'm sure you've all seen this viral moment where people were injured on the train because the blast wave hit the train and the missile hit near the train station. But there were also a lot of attacks around Dnipro that no one is talking about for some reason, that caused a lot more damage and a lot more deaths that were in the 20s of people. So Trump's response into saying Patriot missiles are very hard to get and we need them too, they're 100% effective, is almost like a mockery. And it's unsubstantiated because there are patriots that that the US can sell. Also, the US knows about Iranian strikes on its bases way ahead of time and evacuates all the planes and all the people and everything. So it's like it's purely an excuse. The US has enough Patriot missiles to sell to Ukraine. Trump is just being Trump. And then this is also the time where imposing maximum sanctions on Russia is the most effective because Russia only responds to force. Clearly, when Trump says, I'll talk to Putin and we'll discuss this or whatever, it doesn't mean anything because Trump has talked to Putin many times. We know the whole Vladimir, stop, which kind of like, to me, honestly, sounds like something that is just a tantrum, and the same tantrum he had with Israel lately, with Israel recently. The ceasefire lasted basically no time, and Trump had to plea on Truth Social for them to not bomb, for them to not continue bombing again. And he's very well aware that these conflicts are not resolved with him just talking to these leaders and him pleading on social media, because clearly it has produced no results. But then Marco Rubio comes out and says that, imposing more sanctions on Russia right now would be a complete defeat and a halt of dialogue between Washington and Moscow regarding the Russia's war in Ukraine, because they're not talking to anyone in Europe. They're just talking to the US out of any country that's on our side in the world. And basically, the US, if the US president imposes sanctions, he's basically admitting that this negotiation won't happen anytime soon. There have been 5 months of negotiations since Trump became president, and literally nothing has come out of it. The negotiations are useless. The only reason Ukraine is going with them is to show willingness to have negotiations. But we know, as much as the next person and as much as Marco Rubio, that these negotiations lead to nothing. I was talking to a military official in Ukraine recently, and one of the things that came out of our conversation is that, the idea of diplomatically ending this war by talking to Russia is Russia's propaganda. And the only people that it benefits is Russia, because it just gives them time, and it stretches it and holds it for them to be able to produce more drones, produce more missiles, produce more things to unleash on Ukraine. Because this dialogue is really not a dialogue. It's Russia's monologue where they continue putting forth demands and just saying the same thing they did in 2022, talking about Nazis, talking about Ukrainian disarmament, talking about all of these things that are only beneficial to Russia. It's not a dialogue. It's an ultimatum monologue. Russia is not willing to budge on anything. And while this dialogue is happening, Russia is only amplifying its attacks on Ukraine. Like, how can you be so hypocritical, and how can you be so cynical that you keep saying that, oh, imposing sanctions on Russia and halting their ability to destroy Ukraine is going to stop the dialogue, while Russia is amplifying its attacks? Does that not halt and stop the dialogue? That should be something that halts and stop the dialogue and makes you understand that this is going nowhere. But of course, that's not what it is. So all in all, I mean, NATO summit recently has been really good because Zelensky has met with a lot of leaders. Canada has pledged more support. The UK has pledged more support. Europe seems more united than ever. Lots of people are calling out Donald Trump. Lots of people are standing up to him and saying how important it is that, he puts as much effort into the resolution in Ukraine as he does everywhere else. And in that sense, this is a very productive summit, and it shows a very united front on this side of the world. But at the same time, in terms of the US, it almost starts feeling like the same. It almost starts feeling the same way as when we talk to Russia, where it's kind of like talking to a wall. It's not producing any results, and the US officials are refusing to see it from the perspective of world security and from the perspective of Russia is not willing to work with you. Russia is not your friend. Russia is not an ally. Russia has no respect to you or Donald Trump or really anyone. It's not personal. It's just Russia. And that not giving Ukraine air defense and not sanctioning Russia and not making radical steps, as radical as you did with Iran, for instance. And I'm not saying bomb Russia. I'm just saying radical steps is not going to lead anywhere. So the US refusing to acknowledge it and the US refusing to admit it is only making it worse. And at this point, genuinely, the dialogue with the US starts resembling the dialogue with Russia. And unfortunately, that's all I have for you for today. And I hope that you enjoyed this short briefing. And if you did, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, turn on all of your notifications, send this video to a friend, like it. And also, as per usual, of course, please do leave me your thoughts and what you think of the situation, because I'm very curious to hear from you. Till next time.